Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Michael Hurley, lawyer, sailor, wilderness canoeer, and writer. Michael Hurley is a native of Maryland who has lived in North Carolina since 1992. Between 1995 and 2003, he chronicled the wilderness canoe trips that he took with his two children all over North America in a journal he published as Paddle and Portage. That journal eventually made its way into the hands of 10,000 subscribers and was the basis for his first book, Letters from the Woods. His new memoir, Once Upon a Gypsy Moon, An Improbable Voyage and One Man's Yearning for Redemption, was published this week by Center Street. So please give a warm Quail Ridge welcome to Michael Hurley.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Having never given a talk at a book signing before, I wasn't sure of what I would be expected to say, so I took the liberty of preparing a short speech. Have no fear, I have timed myself, and I promise I won't use more than my 15 minutes of fame. First, I want to say welcome and how flattered I am that you came. Quail Ridge is wonderful to sponsor these events, and I want to thank them for taking an interest in my book. If you haven't yet had a reason to use the bathroom here, I recommend that you make one up. In there you will find not only a rocking chair, but signed photographs on the walls from many authors much more famous than the one speaking to you now. They too came to Quail Ridge to sign their books, and I am honored to be in their company. Once Upon a Gypsy Moon, as was just mentioned, is my second book. It was the first one published by an honest-to-God big New York publisher. After I self-published my first book in 2005, I would come to bookstores and find myself wishing that I had a crock pot full of Swedish meatballs to hand out, like the folks standing in front of grocery store aisles, so that I could first catch people's attention by offering them a free meatball, and then when I had them in range, say, could I interest you in buying a copy of my book? But here you all are today without the promise of the first meatball, so this is real progress for me, and I thank you for coming. You truly are a special group of people because you were all book lovers and readers, in addition to many of you friends of mine, or you wouldn't be here. In our world today, people who read books for pleasure are increasingly rare. It may interest you to know that the author whose books have sold the most copies in history, apart from William Shakespeare, was born more than a century ago, when there were less than half as many readers in the world as there are today. And yet the 4 billion books sold by Agatha Christie, born in 1890, are almost 10 times the number of books sold by J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. The reason for this is no mystery. The average American now spends more than 5 hours of every day in front of a television set and another hour and a half on the internet. If you work an 8-hour day, sleep for 8 hours, and then spend another 7 hours on the TV and Facebook, there is almost no time left for anything else. Nowadays, if you are reading anything more than a Twitter feed or the credits on Dancing with the Stars, you may consider yourself a literary giant. Some of you are seeing my book and reading The Dust Jacket for the first time tonight. I imagine that some of you who might not know me very well, or perhaps not as well as you thought, may be surprised or even a little disturbed to read in the first line of the inside flap that this is a book that was begat by divorce, that was begat by infidelity, specifically my own. I can tell you that it was a little jarring when I first read those lines, and realize that if my publisher's wildest dreams come true, the first thing that thousands of people will learn about me is that I cheated on my wife and betrayed my children's trust. Even now, my first impulse is to hide those facts, which is exactly why I have forced myself to reveal it. I believe that owning up to our failings is really the only way to get past it. So I thought that tonight I might say something about 2 lessons that I learned from my experience. When any long-term marriage fails, it is a tragedy. But when a long-term marriage fails, due to the infidelity of one's spouse. It is often seen not only as a failure, but as a scandal, and it is regarded by some less with compassion than with moral shame. In my case, no one was throwing stones at me as in the gospel story of the adulterous woman, but I lost some friends that had known me and my family for years, some friends who would once stop and chat with me about their children or their lives would see me and look away. This certainly didn't describe everyone I knew, but it described some of them. In fairness, I had been married for 25 years, and a lot of people simply didn't know how to relate to me as a divorced single man. The story of what happened to me and to my marriage was very frightening to them as a cautionary tale for their own marriages. What I learned is that there is a common tendency in our American culture to become polarized in our view of the world and the people in it as being assigned to one of two camps, the saints or the sinners, the sheep or the goats. I often think of the scene in the original Wizard of Oz when Dorothy arrives in Munchkin Land and is asked the question by Glinda, are you a good witch or a bad witch? The correct answer to that question for Dorothy and for all of us is that we're a little of both. But those shades of gray in yourself and in the world can be hard to see unless and until you've had to admit publicly to some really big mistakes, as I have. If you're a fan of Tolkien, you will remember the chapter in The Lord of the Rings when Frodo Baggins first slips on the One Ring. Not only does Frodo disappear to those around him, but he enters an alien world that is a negative image of the world he just left. The story seemed very real to me because after my divorce, in a way, I felt just like Frodo. I had become invisible to others and was stuck in a dark and dystopian world of my own. The sailing voyage that ultimately became the subject of this memoir was my effort to escape that negative world and my own sense of invisibility. I wanted to use my time at sea to reflect on and write about what I had been through. I was also seeking a grand adventure to expand my horizons, just as my career, my friendships, and my finances were shrinking. And so I set sail alone in a small boat on the open ocean. At the time, it seemed to be the most reckless decision I had ever made. But in hindsight, it turned out to be the smartest thing that I ever did. I met my wife Susan on the voyage, and I found a new heading for my life. So then, what did I learn that might be of value to you? First, I came to realize that the mistakes of our past can become a kind of prison that can hold us back in everything else we do. Too often we let the negative voice of our conscience define us by the mistakes we make. I learned instead to forgive myself for my trespasses, because if God forgives me, it's really false pride to refuse to forgive myself, as if to suggest that my standards are so much higher than God's. If we let go of the past, we will not be defined by the past. As I wrote in the book, a ship's wake tells you where she has been, not where she is going. And so I gradually found the confidence to say, I am not an adulterer. I am someone whom God has forgiven, and who has forgiven himself for the adultery he once committed. This is something I did, it is not something I am. Then, with faith in a forgiving God, I gradually gained enough confidence to take a leap of faith. For me, that leap was the decision to realize the dream of a long-distance ocean voyage and the dream of finding new love in a relationship in which each person made the other the first priority. Others will have different dreams, but it is important, I believe, that we all dream of something. There is a famous quote that is usually attributed to Mark Twain, although there is apparently some question whether he ever wrote it, but it speaks for itself. It says, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. To Twain's quote, I would only add this practical bit of advice. Trade winds regularly blow in excess of 20 knots. Before you decide to sail away from the safe harbor, make sure you have checked your vessel for frayed lines so that you don't lose your sails and find yourself drifting toward communist Cuba with no ability to steer upwind. If you don't know what I mean by that, you'll have to read. Tonight, my hope for all of us is that we will always be quick to forgive ourselves and others, and that we will never lose the courage to leap, to dream, to discover, and explore uncharted waters in whatever form they might take in our lives, knowing that in the end, what matters most is not whether we succeed or fail, but that we have attempted the voyage. Thank you very much, and I think now is the point where I'm supposed to entertain questions from the audience, if anyone has. Would anyone like a meatball? To those prepared remarks, I would add that the gentleman here who was just telling me about his voyage in the Virgin Islands, a little bit about the mechanics of a long-distance sailing voyage and how it works. I grew up sailing on Chesapeake Bay and really learned in sort of fits and starts in my brother's boats, and eventually got the wild hair to buy a boat before I bought a house after I got out of law school. And so sailing really became an obsession at the time. And I had another wild hair when I was 32 years old, 34, and had a 2-year-old son to sell my Texas law practice and strike out as a sailboat charter captain in New Bern, North Carolina. So with a family of 4, I ran headlong into an income of $11,000 a year. And there's a gentleman sitting in the back of the room who saved me from that fate when he hired me as an attorney for some of his cases back then. And so I slowly cobbled together a law practice in North Carolina, starting in New Bern in '92. But I never let go of the dream of being a long-distance sailor. And really, when I was sort of down to my last chip after this divorce, both monetarily and emotionally, it was really the last thing that was left to me. And aside from the fact that no one would buy my boat, I really didn't want to let her go, so I put what little money I had into sort of fixing her up in the spring and summer of 2009. I sold most of everything I had. I was living in a tiny apartment. And some of these people remember me riding my motorcycle to work because I had sold my car. But I still had this boat. And I went to Annapolis with the idea that I was going to take the boat to the Bahamas. And an old friend of mine from college met me and his wife for dinner in Annapolis and told me about the heart attack that I suffered that spring. And I thought, my God, this is not a day too soon. That's it, but you never know how much time we have. So I left, and much to the consternation of some of the old salts around Annapolis, my plan was to sail around the Outer Banks, not down the Intercoastal Waterway, but through the graveyard of the Atlantic. And I was blessed by good weather to get around that 350 miles around the Outer Banks. But I remember sailing past the Diamond Shoals Light and knowing the stories of all the shipwrecks through history that have happened there. And just seeing that light was so eerily calm. I thought, boy, this can't be good. So I was happy to see that pass in my way. And then I got to Beaufort and I was home again, so I had another decision to make, whether to stay or go. And I remember, and write about this in the book, sitting on the porch of Town Creek Marina in Beaufort, North Carolina, late at night. It was Thanksgiving, and I was all by myself, and I thought, if you don't have any money, you have no business to do, But I just couldn't let it go, and almost as a temptation, an old marina where I kept the boat, it was far cheaper than where I was going. I called and said, we got to let this slip through. So it was almost like two angels on your shoulder talking to me. I decided that I was going to go. And so I jumped in my boat, headed out into the channel, and within 3 minutes had run aground. And so there was my first sign. But, you know, in a testament to the wonderful maritime industry we have on the coast of North Carolina, somebody was there to pull me off in a minute, and I was off again and on my way out through the, Kevin Murphy here will remember heading out of Beaufort Inlet. He's done that with me on other trips. And late at night, kind of a misty rain, headed offshore, and that began the voyage that eventually took me all the way to Cuba. And but along the way, I was offshore of Charleston, South Carolina, late one night, and by the wonderful assistance of a mechanical wind vane, I was able to sail the boat, but I hadn't quite figured the operation of that thing out exactly yet. So it was steering me toward Africa, and I couldn't figure out how to make me go south. So I had to put into the port of Charleston for repairs. And there again, we hear the still small voice of God forwarding our plans and altering our itineraries. And it was 2 weeks later that I heard from this lovely woman standing in the back pointing a camera at me, Susan, my wife. Took her out on the first day to Charleston. And so the voyage has meant so much more to me than just a sailing trip. I hope that comes through to you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I think now I'm supposed to sign it.